Now, and Arnold Viersen is up.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us today and sharing your work, sharing the work that your organization does. It's clear that NWAC has made combating violence against Indigenous women and girls the primary focus of your work. And I liked how you highlighted at the beginning is that in order to eliminate poverty, we have to get rid of violence first. That's probably, if we can eliminate the violence, the poverty will be reduced in and of itself. When it comes to violence against women, there's one area that I'm particularly interested in hearing about that was raised by your organization 2 years ago at a Senate committee. And at that time, the NWAC urged that the impact of accessibility to online violent, sexual explicit material on youth and especially boys be at the forefront of our minds as parliamentarians. Could you share with the committee about why you believe this is on an issue that Parliament should examine and take action on?
Okay, so just to be clear, what I was pointing out was that this is a very vicious cycle, that ending violence helps to end poverty because it allows our women to get an education, to get employment, to take care of their families. At the same time, the poverty is contributing to the violence and the lack of safety. So it's an unfortunate never-ending cycle where poverty reproduces the violence and the violence reproduces the poverty. So I just wanted to be clear. As well as with the issue of online sexualized violent sexualized content, we have seen significant research that shows that generations now of young people and young boys specifically who are being exposed to explicit, violent, sexualized content that depicts the degradation and the dehumanization, objectification of women leads to increased violence. We need only look at the situation that happened with Cindy Gledoux to see one of the most extremely offensive, horrific atrocities that is the outcome of that kind of violent content. The fact that that perpetrator's computer content, which had hundreds of graphic, what could only be described as sexual torture, was not allowed to be considered as part of the charges, as part of the evidence for when the perpetrator brutally murdered Cindy Gledoux, who was then herself degraded and dehumanized by having her most vital body parts passed around the jury as evidence, shows exactly the kind of horrific outcome that happens when explicit sexual violent content imprints in young minds. And I think that we are really just beginning to see the outcome in this next generation of what is a very, very different environment. And as a mother and as the Native Women's Association, we know how many times children accidentally stumble onto some of the most horrifying sexual violence on the internet when they are innocently typing in something, I won't even, but to see that kind of long-term shaping of attitudes towards women and girls, which are based, and shaping of attitudes towards sex, and shaping of attitudes towards relationships that then become based on violence. We're seeing it more and more because of the violent content on the internet that increasingly higher numbers of young children are being exposed to.
Seconds, Arnold.
All right. NWAC has also worked to end violence towards women and girls who have been victims of sex trafficking. Do you see a link between the accessibility of violent sexual material and sex trafficking?
I think the availability of online violent sexual material contributes to the larger attitudes that of the degradation and dehumanizing of women generally, but racialized and Indigenous women specifically, which contributes to trafficking, which contributes to a larger societal attitude that often blames the victim in these situations. So for young women, girls, the average age that they are recruited, that they are trafficked, is 13. So arguments that suggest that it's a choice, that the prostitution, when we are talking about the average age is 13, that means this is exploitation of children, and that human trafficking, we need to be very clear, is one of the outcomes of the larger attitudes that degrade and dehumanize Indigenous women specifically.
Thanks. Gary and